Good morning, everyone. It's a very confusing morning, I know, for some of us. We're not quite sure what time it is. That's what happens when you're at sea, and some phones change, some phones don't. So I'm old-fashioned. I always wear a watch, number one. And number two, whenever I wake up on the ship after a time change, I turn on the TV and see what the TV is telling me, because that's the ship's time, and then I know what time it is. And so the same thing, of course, will happen to us after we leave Halifax, because we'll change the next day when we're at sea, and a lot of our devices might not change. And also, when we're at sea, I don't know about you, kind of lose track of not only what day it is, but what day of the week it is. So this is the one day of the year, one holiday of the year that we don't actually say merry or happy. Just wanted to acknowledge that it is Good Friday, and so that there will be a service here for those that are interested at 11:15 this morning. But we're here this morning to talk about lighthouses, one of my favorite subjects. So when everyone else on my team is running up to the bow because they've seen a bird or a whale or something like that, I kind of hang back. But when we pass a lighthouse, that's when I run up to the bow. So when we left Tadoussac, we left the Saguenay River, everyone was out there looking for beluga whales. I went out there to look for a beautiful, beautiful lighthouse on Princess Shoal, which basically looks like it's just rising out of the middle of the St. Lawrence River. I absolutely love lighthouses, and hope by the end of this presentation, if you're not a fan yet, that you will be. And for me, lighthouses is a very personal thing. Where my family cottage is, it's a place that we've gone for over 150 years in our family. And with the boat that we have right now, within about a half-hour boat ride from where we are, I can get to 5 different lighthouses. So the lighthouse has been a very big part of my life growing up. This one in the middle here, especially Trowbridge Lighthouse, which celebrated its 100th anniversary last year, is the closest one to our community. So even with my little runabout that I first got when I was 12 years old, I would be able to make it out to it. It's also an essential lighthouse. So even when the shipping season shuts down on the Great Lakes at the end of December, early January, that light stays functioning all through those cold, dark winters. And the foghorn on it is something that's just part of my DNA now. When I hear that foghorn, it just makes you feel like you're home. But the other one's also very important for shipping, both past and present. The one up in the top right-hand corner, Passage Island, is on an island that's part of Isle Royale National Park. To me, one of the real jewels of the United States National Park System. It was actually a tit-for-tat lighthouse. It's a lighthouse that really only ships coming up to Thunder Bay in Canada would need. There was no U.S. need for it. So the United States were hesitant to build one there, but at the same time, they really needed a lighthouse built on a shoal in Lake Erie that was in Canadian waters. So each country built a lighthouse, basically, for each other's ships, which I always think is such a great story. So lighthouses are something that really, I think maybe it's their location, because they're often in either desolate areas or areas of magnificent water and nature beauty. For example, even in urban areas, you can find beautiful examples of lighthouses almost being turned into art, as they often find. And I flew down to Fort Lauderdale a couple of days before I got on the ship a few weeks ago, and just took a walk around one morning. I first came across this Art Deco lighthouse sort of day marker that's in the entrance to Government Cut, where all the cruise ship goes. I was walking down Ocean Drive down in South Beach that night, and some of the Art Deco buildings were all lit up. This one here has a turret up at the top that's very reminiscent of a Lantern House, where you would find the lighthouse. And speaking of Art Deco, on South Beach in Miami, if you've ever been there, all of the the lifeguard huts are all built in beautiful Art Deco style, except for one. The one that's closest to South Pier is built to represent a lighthouse. So we see lighthouses sort of creeping in everywhere. And once you start looking for them, you find them all over the place. Our love of light comes because you get gorgeous pictures and gorgeous scenery like this of lighthouses. Anybody know where this one is? Yeah, it's the one that many of you are going to be going to in a couple of days. It's part of the included tour going to Peggy's Cove. And it's one of the most photographed lighthouses in the world. And again, it's often the dramatic setting of the lighthouse. But I would also argue it's because as humans, we're just naturally drawn to light. Think about a nice warm fire in your fireplace. Think about people sitting around a campfire, a candlelit dinner, or just all the different times that authors, speakers, religious figures have referred to the power of light. light draws us in. And even though lighthouses were kind of built for kind of the opposite, not to draw people in, but to keep people away, right? That's why we have a lighthouse here. It basically means, don't come near me. But at the same time, it was also a beacon of humanity for those sailors that were often out alone on the seas, and just knowing that someone else is out there, even though you're not supposed to go close to them, it really warmed people's hearts. And that's, I think, why lighthouses are still so important to this day. They're not needed nearly in the same way that they were before, but because of the power that they have, the beauty that they inspire, they're still very much worth saving and worth part of our collective culture. And if we want to start talking about lighthouses, we're going to have to start with Pharos, the first known lighthouse, and it was built in the city of Alexandria, also famous, of course, for the Library of Alexandria. And, of course, the Pharos Lighthouse was one of the 7 original wonders of the world, and it truly was a wonder. So 3 parts to it. It had pretty much a square base at the bottom. Each of those sides is just under 100 feet. It rose up to the next level, an octagonal piece, and then a circular piece where the lantern was, where the fire was lit each night at the top, and where mirrors were installed during the day to reflect the light of the sun, so it could act as a day beacon as well. It was completed construction in 270 BCE. It was started under Ptolemy I and finished under his son II. It took approximately 12 years to build. The records of its height vary by about 15%, anywhere by about 330 feet high up to 380 feet high. So approximately, we can say roughly a 40-story building. That's how tall this building was, which is pretty incredible. Of course, we don't have any visual evidence of it now, except we do in some remaining things such as coinage. So quite a few Roman emperors had coins that included the Pharos lighthouse on it, like this one from the time of Marcus Aurelius. We also have the example of a tomb. This is a tomb that's about 50 kilometers southwest of Alexandria, but it's built in the exact same style as a lighthouse. So we have our sort of quadrilateral base here. A lot of it is covered by sand now. Then we have the octagonal middle piece, and then the round at the top. So the exact same style. So this tomb actually takes on the name of Pharos. And we have a lot of written descriptions as well, including one by this Arabic traveler. And I mention him because one of the panels just out in the Aula foyer, which has, you know, the Mark Twain and Proust and other writers, one of them is his travels in there. So in his book included a description from the 1300s of the lighthouse. And so just to compare this amazing lighthouse, which was functional completely as a lighthouse for hundreds and hundreds of years, we'll compare it to 2 that perhaps are better known now. So the largest lighthouse, the tallest lighthouse in the United States, Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, if you ever see the video of when they had to move it in 1999, it's absolutely incredible. It tops out at about 210 feet. And then the tallest of what we call traditional lighthouses, because there are some taller buildings now that have a light beacon on top, but they weren't built as a lighthouse. But the tallest traditional lighthouse in the world is at Ile Verge. There's 2 lighthouses there. There's the original one, and then there's the new one just to the left of it, and that tops out at 271 feet. So the tallest lighthouse we have right now, 271 feet, and we can argue that this one was about 350 feet. So just an incredible, incredible work of architecture. Pharos is gone, but it lives on in some ways. So the Governorate of Alexandria, which is like equivalent to a province or a state, in both of its flag and its crest, we can see the lighthouse as in the same sort of style as it would existed although so many years ago. Evidence has been found in the area around where they believe the lighthouse was, large chunks of rock and stone, and it is now a very popular diving site. But one of the main ways that Pharos' name lives on is the fact that many languages have adopted a loose translation of Pharos for their word for lighthouse. So in all these languages, that's the word for lighthouse, including faro, the one I know from French, and faro, of course, from Spanish, are words that we use today still to describe lighthouses. The Romans built on the work of the Greeks in Alexandria and had a series of lighthouses all around the empire. Again, we look thanks to coinage, which has survived. So Messina, the straits that divide Sicily from the Italian mainland, an example of one of the lighthouses that was there. Another very important one was Portus. Portus was the entrance to the river that led up to Rome. So it was a very, very important port, which included a large lighthouse right in the center into the entrance of the breakwater. They also, the Romans also built a series all the way down the Atlantic coast, including this one up in Boulogne. This one actually fell into disrepair in about 400, but it was resurrected by Charlemagne after he was crowned in 800 AD, and it was used again for about 300 years. It was destroyed in storms as it had been damaged in fire and then was destroyed in storms in the 1600s. But probably the best example that we have today of a Roman lighthouse is the Hercules Tower, and that's in the northwest corner of Spain in Galicia. And of course, it has been modified and changed a lot over the centuries, but at its core still, it is that same Roman lighthouse that was built in the 1st century CE. So it is considered the oldest lighthouse now in the world, and an absolutely beautiful, beautiful structure. And it's only a very short ride from Santiago to Costantella. So if you ever walking the Camino, for example, you finish up in Santiago, you want to take that short ride and check out the Hercules Tower as well. And like much in the world after that, at least in the Western, would consider the Western world now, things kind of fell into disrepair. In the Middle Ages, there were a few examples of lighthouses being built then. Genoa, Italy has one of the oldest lighthouses. Of course, most of the lighthouses I'm showing you, they're the kind of 2nd, 3rd, sometimes even 4th iteration, but the same kind of style on the same site. And this is really one of the symbols of the city of Genoa now. Interestingly, in the mid-1400s, the uncle of Christopher Columbus was the lighthouse keeper at this lighthouse in Genoa. Another one built around the same time was just off the coast of Pisa to guide ships. Of course, Pisa had a port on the coast for that little drive into Pisa itself, and they built a lighthouse just a couple of decades after the one in Genoa. This is the 3rd iteration. The first one was destroyed by the Genoese. Perhaps they didn't like the idea of someone else having a lighthouse. They destroyed the first one. The second one was destroyed by fire, and this 3rd one was built completely of stone to resist fire, but also built with those sort of pillars at the bottom so water could wash right through. And we'll see that example in other skeletal type lighthouses later on. So this one dates itself from about the 1700s. It's not used as a lighthouse anymore, but it is maintained as a historic monument. One of the new lighthouses is just to the right of it there. The Irish are very proud of having one of the oldest lighthouses in the world, and because back then your buildings kind of were fortifications, right? So they built their lighthouse to look very much like a fortification. The staircase goes up the opposite direction, though. Apparently, they go up clockwise when they're used as a defensive fort, so they're easier to fight out the windows. And this one, the staircase went up the other direction, so it's easier in your dominant right hand to carry up fuel up to the top to light the fire. And then, well, this one was built itself after the Middle Ages. It was built on the site of the first one from the 1300s in the Gironde River, which goes down to Bordeaux. Back when it was an English province, there was a lighthouse built there. But this one, which was completed in 1611, is an absolute masterpiece. It was built by an architect from Paris named Louis Dufoy. It is absolutely beautiful. It has stood up the test of time. You can see at low tide here how it's exposed, but at high tide, the only way to access it is by water. It's so important to the French people that in the early 1850s, at the same time that Notre Dame was made a National Historic Monument, so was this lighthouse. That's how important this lighthouse is. And it's actually going to pop up a couple of times in our little chat this morning again. So, of course, in order to have lighthouses, you need someone to maintain the lighthouse. Back at the beginning, it was just sort of whoever built the lighthouse, but it became important to develop sort of national lighthouse services. And the two earliest examples, this is the headquarters for the one in London in the UK, and it was established in 1514 with the very unwieldy name. I'm not even going to read it all, but this was the name of the organization that was now going to be in charge of lighthouses. They were looking for ways to help make it easier to come up the Thames River. They shortened it a little bit, and they just call it Trinity now. So Trinity House is the name of the lighthouse service, and it was actually the original lighthouse service in British North America, which became Canada as well later on. Saint Clement is the patron saint of one of the patron saints of mariners, so that's how that got into this name. But they didn't actually take control of the first lighthouse until the early 1600s. The first technically lighthouse service was thanks to King Frederick II of Denmark, and he wanted to make sure that ships coming in towards Copenhagen had safe passage between the shores of Denmark and Sweden, and so he instructed 3 wardens in towns along the coast in 1560 to make rudimentary lighthouses up. So the first true lighthouse service in the world we have thanks to Denmark. Most other countries, it wasn't until the late 1700s or sort of mid-1800s that we had lighthouse services. And we'll talk a little bit about the American one in a little bit. And then as colonization happened, as exploration happened in the Western Hemisphere, Cuba, Havana, again, not the original, the third iteration on this site in the fort that enters into the bay, the Malecon. If you've ever been to Havana, the Malecon is just right over here. The old downtown is sort of where I'm standing. Beautiful lighthouse there, the first one built in the mid-1500s. And then in South America, this is the second iteration on this site in Salvador, in Brazil, the first lighthouse almost in 1700. And then when we get to our sort of North American firsts here on the mainland, we have a couple of ones sort of in the areas that we're going to be over the next few days. So we, of course, will be sailing past Boston. We're not going into Boston, but that's where the first lighthouse on the mainland in North America was built in 1716 on Little Brewster's Island in the outer harbor of Boston. Not the greatest start to the lighthouse. The first lighthouse keeper was very, very underpaid, the argument being that he could get money from piloting ships into the harbor and also from tending sheep on Little Brewster Islands. He didn't make much money off of either, and so he kept petitioning for an increase in funds. It was finally granted, and so on one of his trips into Boston to get supplies, he brought his family along to collect his back pay and his new pay as well too. And tragically, on the way back to the lighthouse, there was a storm. Their little boat was swamped, and the entire family was killed. So very sad ending to the first lighthouse keeper in the United States. Here in what is now Canada, at the fortress of Louisbourg, the French, and that's at the very top of Cape Breton Island. We'll be offshore, but sort of sailing by it in a couple of days. And they built their first tower in 1733. It burnt down. A new tower was built. It was actually one of the first buildings that the people from Boston, when they invaded the area in 1745, it was one of the first buildings that they took over. It was destroyed after the second siege of Louisbourg in 1759, and it was the one that's on that same site today is the fourth version of it. We won't see that one, but we're going to see an identical twin of it when we sail into Halifax on George's Island. And then when we get to the actual United States itself, we have a couple of very important lighthouses. So the federal government took over in 1789, took over control of aids to navigation. George Washington was very involved in the construction of the first 2 lighthouses in the newly independent country, including this one at Portland Head in Maine. They were really trying to pinch their pennies, so they used a lot of local stone on site, and they tried to just go just as high as they would need to go. But sadly, the constructors, when they were finished building it, they went up to the top and looked out and realized, yeah, this is not going to really be helpful at all. So they had to petition George Washington, and they needed to add another 20 feet on top of it to make it high enough to be a true aid to navigation. And it still exists to this day. And then in Virginia, we have Old Cape Henry, which was completed the following year. This is the original lighthouse, finished in 1792, with the newer lighthouse right beside it that was built in the late 1800s. This one is run by the United States Coast Guard, of course, and this one is run by a local historical society. There are historical societies all over the world that are very, very interested in lighthouses. It's, for those that are passionate about lighthouses, they spend a lot of time preserving some of these old buildings. Now, if you know anything about lighthouses, this might be a familiar name because this is kind of considered the granddaddy of the lighthouses in Eddystone off the coast of Dover. And it's because of these rocks called Eddystone rocks. And I want to read you a log entry from a ship that passed these rocks. And it described it as a wicked reef of 23 rust-red rocks lying 9½ miles south of Ramhead on the Devon mainland. A great danger to all ships hereabouts, for they sit astride the entrance to this harbor and are exposed to the full force of the westerly winds and must always be dreaded by mariners. Leaving Plymouth, we managed to avoid this reef. So from this log entry, it's a very good thing that this ship managed to avoid this reef, because that's a log from the Mayflower as they left Plymouth in early September of 1620. So there was a lot of concern from the get-go about this reef. And just to give you an idea of where it is, so here's a nautical chart here. And up at the top, we have the city of Plymouth. And then there's Eddystone rocks just to the left of the E in the word Eddystone. So it's just right on the direct path that you would need. And of course, with the technology they have at the time, very difficult to avoid those, especially in a storm. So important when they built a lighthouse there that it became part of the currency of the area. And there's actually been 5 different lighthouses at Eddystone. With Stanley, an engineer, he built the first lighthouse. It took 3 seasons to build the first lighthouse, because the first season, all they could do was get 12 iron rods down into the rock to act as a foundational support. And to do that, during the construction, they had to row from the harbor, and it was a total row of almost 14 miles each way every day, because of course there was nowhere to set up camp there, so they had to row back and forth every day. Sadly, it was destroyed by a storm at the end of its very first season of use in 1898. It didn't take as long to build the next one because they already had the foundation in place. With Stanley, built the second one, much larger, much more ornate. Again, very tragically and sadly, it was destroyed in a storm in 1704. It just so happened at the time Stanley and his entire team were on site, so they were all lost in that storm as well. So a second engineer came in and made a third lighthouse, much more traditional style, got rid of some of the ornateness now, trying to focus on being able to withstand the winds and the waves. That one lasted for much longer, and actually it was destroyed by fire this time, not by waves. But very tragically in that one, there were 2 lighthouse keepers on, it was 1755 when the fire broke out, and one of the lighthouse keepers, unfortunately, as they were descending, and looked up, and a piece of molten lead fell right into his mouth and went right down into his stomach. He survived for 12 days before he died, and in the autopsy they did find about a 200-gram piece of lead in his stomach. So we're not doing too well with this lighthouse. Now the next one, which was built by Smeaton on the same site, it just did fine, and it actually survived for well over 100 years, and it was only taken down because increases in shipping. They needed something bigger and more visible. So the final one, built by Douglas in 1882, is the one that stands there now. The helicopter pad on top was added in the 1980s, so it didn't look like that, of course, when he built it, because that's the easiest way to access. And you'll see a lot of those with lighthouses now, that they have sort of platforms on top. But Smeaton's lighthouse, which held up so well from 1759, it wasn't forgotten. In fact, they actually disassembled his lighthouse, brought it to the coast, and reassembled it where it is a tourist attraction today. And that to me is pretty amazing, not only to build a brand new lighthouse there, but to take apart the old one piece by piece and build it up. So this is kind of the touchstone of all lighthouses in the world, these ones at Eddystone. Now, when we think of a lighthouse, we often think of this design, and of course, the lower the land, the taller the lighthouse needs to be. That's why Cape Hatteras, very low, needs to be a very tall lighthouse. Portland Head was built on a cliff, so it can be shorter. There's often different colorings on lighthouses, so they can act as well as a day marker, so they're recognizable to mariners during the day as well. So what's really important is what we call the focal length, and that's the height of the light itself off of the water. And so that's what lighthouses lighthouse designers are looking for. Now, well, this might be the traditional look of the lighthouse, but especially in the last few decades, people have gotten really carried away with their little lighthouse designs, and I just did a little search on the web to find a few more of the more interesting ones that were the more colorful ones, like this one in Newfoundland of Cape Bonavista. Sadly, for me anyways, as a real passionate lighthouse person, this became, especially in the United States in the mid-20th century, became a very common way of building a lighthouse. Very, very cheap. It costs less than half the cost of building a traditional lighthouse, just building the skeletal frame. It, of course, can also be prefabricated off-site, and if it needs to be moved, if it's not in an appropriate spot, it's very easy to do that. So we see a lot of those replacing some of the old lighthouses now. We see those sort of skeletal frames of lighthouses. And before I go on, before we talked about the sort of the technical part of the light in the lighthouse, just want to mention light ships as well. And so those are lighthouses that are floating on water. It's basically a ship. One of the first examples is a lighthouse light ship in Sweden. And if you've ever been to Stockholm and been to the Vasa Museum, that beautiful museum with a ship that sunk on its maiden voyage, right beside the museum is docked one of the first light ships that were used in the Nordic countries. Now, light ships are really, really helpful, especially in areas where there's a lot of shifting shoals. So here off the coast of Cape Cod, every red dot is the location of a light ship over a 141-year period. Sometimes it's the same light ship moved from place to place, and sometimes they are different light ships. Two ones that you can easily visit today includes this one at the South Seaport in Lower Manhattan in New York City, if you're happening to be staying in New York after we disembark. The Ambrose was an important light ship, and there was about 4 Ambroses, I think, and this was the final one. Another one on the Great Lakes, the last light ship on the Great Lakes was the Huron, and fittingly after it was decommissioned, it was gifted to the town of Port Huron, which is at the entrance from the St. Clair River into Lake Huron as well. So 2 different light ships you can visit. Not much fun living on a light ship. Usually crews of anywhere from 8 to 12. They were, rotating in and out for weeks at a time. You can imagine last night we were getting a little bit of rocking motion there, some nice wave sounds later on, and they have to live in that where it's just staying in one spot. So a very boring, a very challenging way to keep motivated. Often they didn't have any motors in them, so if something happened during a storm and their line broke, their anchor connection broke, they were adrift and they were kind of at the mercy of the waves. So not a very fun way, but a very important way without that, the modern technology we have of marking some of these areas. And if there's one name I'd want you to remember today, it's Fresnel when it comes to lighthouses. This man was absolutely amazing, Augustin Jean Fresnel. He was a physicist and an engineer, and he was challenged by the French government to help to figure out a way to concentrate the light better. So, of course, back in the day, all they did was have fires up there. Then they developed lights using seal oil, for example, but they needed a way to concentrate the beam. They only wanted to go in one direction, where, of course, light goes off everywhere in all sorts of different directions. They tried using concave lenses for decades, and that would cause about 50% light loss. So what Fresnel did was he used his understanding of how light is refracted through different shapes. I'm not going to explain this to you. Grade 13 physics for me was kind of the end of my scientific career, but I do know that light travels through different forms in different ways, and of course that it always wants to end up traveling in a straight line. So he combined these different shapes into a larger lens, so you can see different shapes along here, which allowed that light going on a 360 degrees to all end up going in the same direction. So instead of an over 50% light loss that they were getting with primitive lenses, this was now reduced to a 10% light loss. The very first lighthouse where it was tried was called Douan, that same lighthouse near Bordeaux, that very famous lighthouse in France, and it was an absolute success, and it very quickly spread around the world. Very sadly, just a couple of years after he developed it, he died of tuberculosis, so he never really saw the full extent. And Fresnel lenses they're listed in what's called their orders. So a first order lens is the largest, going down to a sixth order lens, although Canada and Scotland also used seventh and eighth order lenses. You want your first order lens offshore or in areas that are very prone to shipwrecks, very, very large light that can be seen for at least 20 miles away. Your sixth, your fifth order lens, you want them at the entrance to harbors. So light that just is a couple of miles, but just will guide ships in. Now, just to give you the idea of the size of the first order lens at a lighthouse in Fire Island on Long Island, like in many places in the world, they're taking out these lenses now. They're absolutely gorgeous, but with modern lighting, it's much more efficient, but they're desperately sought after by museums. This is an example of the Fire Island first order lens. They're usually about 12 feet high, so twice the size of an average person. Now, we can talk about the Fresnel lens, it being the invention that saved 1 million ships. Not 1 million lives, but 1 million ships, because it absolutely made it so much easier for those mariners out there to know where those obstacles were. Fresnel lenses aren't just found in lighthouses, so we see an example of a lens here at my lighthouse, Trowbridge Lighthouse, the one that's close to me. And again, sometimes being replaced by advances in technology now, but they still are seen in theater lighting everywhere. One of my flights down to Florida, I looked for them on the runway, and sure enough, they're all over the place. I saw Fresnel lenses in all the airport landing lights, and on aircraft carriers, they're there as well too. Old traffic lights all still have them. One of my dad's favorite cars in the world is the 56 Bel Air with those beautiful Fresnel lens headlights that many of us grew up with. Probably nobody younger than us would know what this is, an overhead projector, but that used Fresnel lens technology. And in fact, when the kids these days, if they're trying to find out what a Fresnel lens is, and they look up that on the internet, sadly, this is what they get, how to burn stuff with a giant Fresnel lens. Which I think Fresnel himself would be a little sad about. And I just added in one more slide for this presentation today, just for something to keep a lookout in a couple of days as well, and that's for Sambro Island Light, which is outside of Outer Harbor in Halifax. We're planning to be going by it probably just a little before 7 a.m. in a few days. Hopefully I'll be doing a talk either at the bow or up in the Explorer's Lounge, and if not, we'll see it as we leave Halifax at the end of that day. Now, because the Boston Lighthouse that was built in 1715. It was destroyed by the retreating British during the Revolutionary War and then rebuilt afterwards. This is the actually oldest continuously operating lighthouse in the entire Western Hemisphere, Sambro Island Lighthouse. And not only that, but it had a first order Fresnel lens in it. It was put in 1906 up until the late 1960s when it was replaced by what's called an electric beacon. An electric beacon was first used at airports in the 1930s, and it became easier to maintain than these beautiful lenses. And now today, that's why I'm putting this plug in as well, both the original Fresnel lens and the electric beacon can be found at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. It's not even a 15-minute walk down a beautiful boardwalk from where our ship is going to be docked in Halifax. So if you're interested in seeing a Fresnel lens, to see each of these pieces of glass so carefully carved and polished and put into place, I highly recommend taking a walk down the boardwalk in your free time and heading down to the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. And if you come to Daily Briefing in a couple of days, and if you come to a little mini lecture that I'm doing in a couple of days, I'm going to be plugging the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic a couple of more times yet as well too. Now, besides Fresnel, probably the most other famous name when it comes to lighthouses are the Stevenson family from Scotland, starting with Robert, who built one of the most important lighthouses in Scotland, and that's the Bell Rock Lighthouse. And the rocks are off the entrance to the Firth of Forth, the entrance into Edinburgh, and a very dangerous hazard for shipping back in the late 1700s. It's a beautiful, beautiful lighthouse that has stood for well over 200 years, an absolute marvel of engineering. He passed down his passion to his sons as well for building lighthouses. His oldest son, Alan, took over as chief engineer of lighthouses for Scotland, and he is most famous for a lighthouse on the other side of Scotland known as Skerryvore. And it is the tallest lighthouse in Scotland, had a first first order Fresnel lens in it. It was so well designed and built that when it was finished, the difference between the height on the plans and the height of the lighthouse itself was less than 1 inch, which again, in 1840s, I think that's pretty cool. Followed after Allen, who died younger, brothers Thomas and David as well constructed 30 lighthouses around the British Isles, but more importantly, they designed the first lighthouse in Japan as well, after Japan was forced to open up its commerce to the world, and that lighthouse design inspired lighthouses in Korea and China down into Vietnam as well. The other thing that Thomas did as well is he had a son named Robert who also trained as a lighthouse engineer but decided it really wasn't for him, which is good for all of us. His middle name was Lewis. Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, writer of Treasure Island, originally was going to design lighthouses and ended up not doing that like his other forefathers had. So I mentioned that we would talk a little bit about U.S. lighthouse services. We have to start off with this gentleman. Whenever I see his last name, I always think of the word Pleasant. If you look at his face, nothing but pleasant about this man. And he, oh my goodness, this man was so cheap. So the whole sort of who is in charge of lighthouses just kept bouncing around the federal government for well over 100 years. He was the 5th auditor of the Treasury and was in charge of lighthouses for almost 30 years. And he would not do anything to upgrade them. Remember how I said after Fresnel built his first lens in the 1820s, how it spread rapidly around the world? Everywhere but the United States, because Stephen was not paying to get those installed on American lighthouses. He always put the bottom line before the safety of the mariners and the lighthouse keepers themselves. And I'll just give you one example. So I talked about lightships before. So there's a reef called Diamond Reef off the East Coast. This is not that lightship. This, of course, it was an earlier version of it. This was the final Diamond Reef lightship. Anyways, the one that he was in charge of, in a storm, it lost its anchor, lost its line, was drifting, was fortunately saved, brought into harbor. And it would cost $2,000 at the time to replace that anchor and line. What Stephen did instead is he said, I will pay $500 to whoever can find the old line and anchor. And he left that lightship docked at port for over 6 months while he waited for somebody to try to find it, which means that hazard to navigation was unmarked for almost half of a year before he finally relented and put out the money so that the lightship could get back on site. A second famous person involved with lighthouses in the United States is Orlando Pohl. He was a chief engineer of the Lighthouse Board, specifically focused on the Great Lakes. So after 1855, when the first lock was built between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, rapidly increasing traffic within the Great Lakes, and they had some really challenging areas to build lighthouses. He oversaw many of them, including this beautiful one called Spectacle Reef Lighthouse, and it lies about 10 miles offshore off of the Mitt, the lower part of Michigan, close to Rogers City. It's an absolutely gorgeous lighthouse. But if there is one person that should be revered when it comes to lighthouse in the United States, it's George Putnam, who took over control of lighthouses when an actual lighthouse commission was established in 1910. It's a role he fulfilled until he retired in 1935. He actually made it a professional lighthouse service. He did two very important things from the view of lighthouse keepers. Number one, he was the first to implement pensions for them so that they had some funds once they retired, because lighthouse keepers were never paid very well. The second thing he did was he embraced automation. So the number of total navigational aids, which just doesn't include lighthouse but all sorts of other things, more than doubled during his tenure, making marine traffic much safer. But the number of employees actually decreased by 800 because he so much embraced technology. He retired in 1935, like I said. His guy that took over was just in his position for 4 years before the United States Coast Guard took over in 1939. And of course, they remain the people in charge of lighthouses to these days. Now, when I was a kid going out to visit these lighthouses, for me, it's like when I was in my 20s and going to bars for the first time. I wanted to own my own bar when I was in my 20s. I thought that's the most cool thing in the world, to actually have your own bar. Now, when I was a teenager, I wished I could own my own lighthouse because it just looked so cool. And as Charles Dickens wrote, you know, that quiet life, that beautiful life of solitude and peace of being a lighthouse keeper, there must be nothing like it. It's a terrible, terrible job, and it always was. Now, just to give you one example, in 1809, the first manual in what is now Canada was established for lighthouse keepers. It had 10 rules, 10 things that a lighthouse keeper was expected to do as part of their job. This version comes from the early 1900s. By 1912, there were 193 rules that lighthouse keepers had to follow. They weren't paid very well. Their spouse, because they were often married, was basically working for free, and often when the lighthouse keeper died in the middle of the season, the spouse was expected to take over at no pay until they could find a replacement. And if you just think of some of the things that lighthouse keepers traditionally had to do, especially before technology took off, those beautiful Fresnel lenses that I talked about, they had to be cleaned very, very often. So each one of those pieces of glass had to be cleaned. Talking about painting, there's a lighthouse that we couldn't see, of course, but that we passed on the Gaspé Peninsula. That has over 200 stairs just from the rocks, from the jetty where the boats come in, up to where the keeper's cabin is, that had to be painted every second years. It required over 40 gallons of paint, so constantly painting. I always thought when I went out to visit the lighthouse keepers back when I was a teenager, they were so happy to see me, and maybe they were, but they were probably just pretending, because acting as a tour guide is something that they didn't have to do, but they always did so willingly, which took them away from their regular duties. And of course, it's so fun when you go to a lighthouse to climb up the stairs and look out, but if you have to do that multiple times a day as part of your job, I imagine the allure wears off rather quickly. So, of course, with modernization came the end of lighthouse keepers in general around the world, especially now with the move to the efficient LED lighting, which makes it even easier to focus that beam in a certain direction. Automation, of course, especially with foghorns. Foghorns used to have to be manually controlled. Some lighthouse keepers were required to, out of their own pay, hire someone else to man the foghorn 24 hours a day during incredibly foggy times. So automation there really helps out. Many lighthouses now are remote controlled and monitored remotely, so if there's any issues, they know at a moment's notice. And of course, in the past couple of decades, the move away from diesel generators, which are very costly to maintain and of course require the refueling all the time, moving to solar and wind power has made a huge difference. And that of course means that the lighthouse keeper has really passed us by. Canada is one of the few countries in the world that still has a significant number of lighthouse keepers. We have just over 50 of them. Approximately half of them are on the west coast, so if you've ever taken an Alaskan cruise, going past some of those beautiful lighthouses there, it's approximately 25 there, and the other half are around Newfoundland. And they're there primarily because the areas that they're in are so remote that if there was a problem with the lighthouse, it would be difficult to get there very quickly. And they also one of the most important things a lighthouse keeper has done, which I'm not really touching on in this presentation, is the role of a safety person too, because life-saving was a huge part, not a paid part, but a part that every lighthouse keeper, of course, wanted to do. Now, one of the most interesting lighthouses in I say Canada, some might disagree with me, is Mash's Sea Island. It's off the coast of New Brunswick in Maine, and the dividing line between Canada and the United States sort of runs around it. In 1982, the International Court actually delineated for something that they had been fighting about for a couple of hundred years, and it was about fishing rights in that area, but they forgot to do Mash's Sea Island. So both Canada and the United States to this day still claim the island. Canada has a lighthouse on it, and so it staffs that lighthouse as sort of an interest of sovereignty thing. The United States has a number of touring vessels that come in from Maine, so they've established docks there that they use to bring tourists back and forth to establish their sovereignty on it. So it's kind of like a joint sovereignty island still. But we go back to that first lighthouse in North America. We go back to Boston Light again, that we talked about that first lighthouse keeper on there. And we end with Boston Light when we talk about lighthouse keepers, because in 1989, Senator Ted Kennedy was able to add on to some bill that as long as that is a United States Coast Guard lighthouse, it has to be staffed, because of course so many lighthouses were being automated. So it was staffed by Coast Guard officials until the early 2000s. 2000s when a retired professor took over. Now, she had been in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. This is her real name, Dr. Sally Snowman, and she took over as lighthouse keeper as a civilian, but working for the United States Coast Guard Service. She lived there for a number of years, and they had problems with the plumbing system, so she moved to the mainland, and every day that she could, she would row out there. And she just retired in 2023. And one of the reasons that she retired is because the Coast Guard sold the lighthouse, as many are being sold, to a private group. And so she took that as her time to retire. So she is officially the last lighthouse keeper in the United States at the lighthouse that was the first one. It's kind of like a full circle thing in so many ways. And just to mention one other one, we'll just pop in that lighthouse again in France, that same one we've talked about a couple of times. It's now the only staffed lighthouse in France, so that's how important that lighthouse is. So if you want to experience lighthouses today, well, you can either get your Canadian citizenship, and they're happily looking for people. They're always desperate for lighthouse keepers in both Newfoundland and BC, so if that's something you might be interested in. But for most of us, it's staying at a lighthouse now, because many lighthouses have been turned into little hotels, bed and breakfasts. There's many lighthouses where you can go for a week and become a lighthouse keeper and actually help with the upkeep as well, too. There's at least 6 of them on the Great Lakes in the United States, including this one on Lake Superior at Two Harbors, Michigan. And to finish off, just taking a look at some beautiful lighthouses. Now, probably too early in the morning, but Race Rock Lighthouse off of Long Island. We always think about those immigrants first coming in and seeing the Statue of Liberty. Well, actually, Race Rock was the first sort of man-made structure that they would see as they would make their approaches before they entered New York Harbor. I was very fortunate to see this one last fall in the Beagle Channel near Ushuaia in Argentina, the southernmost lighthouse in the world. This beautiful lighthouse in Greece is now one of the most photographed lighthouses. It looks like a very ancient old lighthouse, but it was actually built in the 1990s to replace one that had been destroyed a few decades earlier in a lighthouse, in an earthquake, and they built it on the same rock. And I don't know how that thing is still standing up. One of my favorites is Split Rock Lighthouse in Minnesota, not too far from Two Harbors, that one I just showed you. One of the most photographed American lighthouses in the world. Very special for those that are interested in the Edmund Fitzgerald as well, too. This was probably the last lighthouse Edmund Fitzgerald saw. It's decommissioned. It's not used as a light anymore. It's a Minnesota State Park. But every November the 10th, the day that the Edmund Fitzgerald sunk, they relight the light and they read the names of the 29 men that were on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And this coming November, of course, being the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald, it's only a less than 2-hour drive from where I live. That's where I am going to be on November the 10th this year as they light that one up. Cape Bryan in Australia, got to throw one in there for the Aussies. It's the easternmost lighthouse in Australia, more than 1.1 million candle power, an incredibly powerful lighthouse. This one off the northern coast of California, decommissioned now, but it was often known as the Eddystone of the United States, an incredibly difficult engineering project to build that important lighthouse. Even on inland areas, like in Germany, this is on Lake Constance or Bodensee, depending on which country you're in, which name for the lake, in between Switzerland and Germany. Just a gorgeous lighthouse there. And because we're going in that direction, the Statue of Liberty, when it first opened in 1886, it was a lighthouse as well. The Lighthouse Service had control over a little part of the island and of the light itself, and it stayed as a lighthouse until around 1905, when they finally decided, this really isn't doing much. The light isn't powerful enough to be a lighthouse. So in our stops over the next couple of days, there are lots of places to buy some puzzles for lighthouses. If you want to check out some lighthouse movie, my son is in film school, and he says that this one here, The Lighthouse, is an excellent film, which means I probably would be bored by it because he's into all those very hoity-toity things. Great books out there set at lighthouses. This one I mentioned in my first slide, Porphyry Island, one that's only half an hour from me. This is a historical fiction that's set in that lighthouse. A couple of my great-great-uncles are actually mentioned in it. It's a great place we're going to see lighthouses as well. The one in the top left-hand corner of the time covered there, that's Montauk Lighthouse off the eastern side of Long Island. And of course, anytime you go anywhere near any kind of maritime place, they're always going to have a lot of memorabilia about lighthouses you can buy. This is one of my favorites. This always reminds me of my mom. This is a Christmas decoration that she loved and I love now. And when you pull the cork off, you start to hear waves and seagulls. You hear the bell of a buoy, and then you start to hear that foghorn of the lighthouse too. So it's one of my favorite things at Christmas, is just standing there and lifting the cork off of that one. Truly, lighthouses are amazing, and George Bernard Shaw couldn't have put it better when he said, "I can think of no other edifice constructed by man as altruistic as a lighthouse. They were built only to serve." And I'm going to finish with one more lighthouse. So Peggy's Cove, where many of you are going, is arguably the most photographed lighthouse in the world, but when it comes to one single photograph, this is the big one here. So this man, Jean Chouichard, in the late 1980s, he was doing a series of photographs around the coast of Brittany in France. And on a very stormy day in December of 1989, he headed out on a hired helicopter to take some pictures of lighthouses in a storm. So we know now that the word phare in French means lighthouse, and tempête means storm. And this is the photo. He took a series of photographs, and this is the one that has sold over 1 million copies of just this print of the lighthouse. Won awards for it as well too. And of course, it's got a little story to it as well. This lighthouse was lost its active keeper in 1991. Remember, I said this was 1989 that this picture took place. And as the helicopter is out shooting pictures, the lighthouse keeper had no idea what that sound was. So he actually opened the door. And if you can see him out there, it's kind of, see him right up there. He's opened the door with those waves coming around, saw that it was a helicopter, very quickly went inside and closed the door again, which was a very good thing as well. So these amazing structures, which can withstand so much of nature's fury, still sparkle the imagination, inspire us to take so many pictures, and again, they keep drawing us in because of that wonderful light that they have. So hopefully you're all team lighthouses now, and keep an eye out for the birds, keep an eye out for the whales, but please also keep an eye out for our lighthouses as well too. I don't have time for questions, unfortunately. It's almost 10:02, but I'll be over here in the corner if you have any questions or something to share before you go. So right now in Expedition Central, it says the Aula Foyer on your daily on the Viking Daily, but they moved it to the Expedition Central. Megan and Haley, two of our scientists, are going to be doing some talking and hands-on stuff with microplastics, if you want to take a look at that. And like I mentioned as well, there's an interdenominational short service here at 11:15 for Good Friday as well. Otherwise, seas look pretty good, so I really look forward to seeing Les Îles de Madeleine with you in just a couple of hours. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a nice rest of your day.